You've entered Bookstorm with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Welcome back, Bookstorm listeners, and you are going to be very excited with who we have with us today because we've been listening to you, and a lot of you had written in telling us how much you love this book, Honor by Thrity Umrigar. Well, Thrity is a best-selling author, but guess who agrees with you? Reese Witherspoon has also chosen this book as a favorite, and Kristen and I could not agree more. We love this book, Honor, and we're thrilled to have the author, Thrity Umrigar, with us today.
Thank you so much, both of you, for having me here. It's a true pleasure.
We're so happy to have you. We can't wait to dive deep into this book. But first, I want to tell our listeners a little bit about your backstory because it's very interesting. As you all know, she is the author of best-selling books that have been translated into several languages, published in over 15 countries. Thrity is also the Distinguished University Professor of English at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland. Congratulations. Her books have placed as finalists in PEN Beyond Margins Awards, the Society of Midland Authors Award, Chautauqua Literary and Scientific Circle selections. She is the winner of Cleveland Arts Prize, the Lambda Literary Award, and Seth Rosenberg Prize. And she is the recipient of a Nieman Fellowship to Harvard. Wow. Thrity was born in Bombay, India. She came to the U.S. when she was 21. As a Parsi child attending a Catholic school in a predominantly Hindu country, she had this kind of schizophrenic and cosmopolitan childhood, as she describes it, that served her well in writing. She was accused by teachers and parents of being a daydreamer, head in the clouds. She grew up in a lost fictional world, and she's bringing us those worlds today. Thank you for that. She would emerge long enough from these books to create her own poetic and fictional worlds. She was survived business school by creating a drama club, writing, directing, and acting. Wow. Her short stories, essays, and poems are published in national magazines and newspapers since she was 15 years old. Thrity worked for several years as an award-winning reporter, columnist, and magazine writer. You have done it all, it sounds like.
Not really. I have never played professional hockey.
Okay. Okay, there you go. Well, we're just thrilled that you are a novelist. We love this book, Honor. Our listeners who haven't heard it yet or read it yet are going to enjoy this deep discussion, and they're going to want to pick up this book.
Well, thank you for that great introduction. I feel like I should hang up now. May as well quit while I'm ahead.
All right, well, Thrity Honor, as you know, of course, as the writer, is set in India, and it essentially tells two stories. What I'd like to do is give our listeners a little bit of a background about the book. I won't give away any spoilers, I promise, and I would love for you to add anything if you'd like to at the end. But these two stories, first of all, highlight some of the contrasts of India: wealth and poverty, growth, opportunity, tradition. But it also highlights the stories of two very different women. We meet Meena. She is a young woman who is living in a small village. She is functionally illiterate, and she has lived under the control of her brothers for a long time growing up. The village is steeped in some old ways. It's a very strong patriarchal society. And at some point, Meena accepts a job at a factory. and this does not go over well with her family, especially with her brothers. She eventually takes it a step further and falls in love with a coworker. They do not share the same faith, and she pays a high price for some of the choices that she makes. We also meet Smita. Now, Smita is an international journalist based in New York, and she is eventually sent to India to cover Mina's story. There is an upcoming trial, and of course, Smita is trying to get an interview and to do her research. She was born in Bombay, but moved to the US as a teen. And Smita is going home in some ways. And we get to experience India through her eyes, her adult eyes. And right off the bat, we could tell she's a little uncomfortable. And as readers, we are too. We're not sure what to make of some things that she's experiencing. Now, these stories converge and they force both women to confront so many things about love and identity. But eventually, we see the complexity and the beauty of India through both of their eyes. It is an amazing story. Would you like to add anything to that summary?
It's actually a very good summary. I suppose if I was adding anything, I would only say that yes, these two stories converge, but in some ways they are also two parallel love stories. That of course occur in the same era for sure, but given Smita's sort of class background, her education opportunities, just her privileged background, and contrasting that with Mina's, there's a big power differential between them, and yet both women eventually fall in love. So they are love stories also.
Beautiful. Well, with that introduction, then, are we ready to brave the storm? Chris, you want to kick us off?
Yes, we can't wait. So, Thrity, I want to say thank you for this engrossing story. It opens the eyes of the reader to the horrors of prejudice, superstition, the dangers that sometimes come with customs and traditions, and sometimes the hateful religious beliefs and punishments. There was a strong underlying theme surrounding our ability to purposefully choose love or to choose fear. The character Mina says, and I'm going to quote, "A woman can live in two houses, fear or love. It is impossible to live in both at the same time." This hit the reader very strongly because this is something we all struggle with this throughout life. Also, the two beloved characters, Smita and Mohan, they both struggled with love or fear. And I wondered what you believe as the writer about these two juxtapositions of love and fear. What traits did you instill in these characters to be able to overcome fear? Because I'm wondering if this is something that maybe we could all learn from in the real world.
It's a great question. I think the trait that I gave these characters, perhaps there are differences of degrees because, as I mentioned earlier, their circumstances are very different. But the traits that I gave them was to ultimately choose love, and so that takes courage, right? Because love is a verb, as we have all heard. It's something that one does actively, and perhaps you make breakfast for your wife or your husband, and yeah, that's an active form of loving somebody also. But when you are in situations like what Mina finds herself in, where she can literally pay for choosing her Muslim husband, she's a Hindu woman, choosing her Muslim husband, and she can pay for that love, she can pay for that choice with her very life. I mean, there's a true risk that she takes. That just takes love as a verb to a whole different level, right? So she is frightened, as any of us in her situation would be. But at some point, love overrides fear. So to answer your question of what characteristic I gave all these characters, it's courage. It's courage to do the right thing, to be true to yourself, and ultimately to follow your heart, and hope that by demonstrating this love, by being a good person, you can influence the community around you. And of course, the book tells you how sometimes that works and how sometimes that backfires, right? So there's no guarantee to that choice. You don't make the choice because you're assured of the result. You make the choice because, in a sense, there is no choice, right? If you love somebody, you love them. It's not like you are um, working your way up to that love. It just happens.
Mhm. And the love between these two characters of Muslim and Hindu faith was so profound for the reader. And it really brought us back to the meaning of what love is. It should not be a prerequisite for certain things that each individual possesses or believes. It should be a love for each other. You wove it so beautifully. I also want to add one thing. You also showed the reader something else, that the reader could not help but be filled with a lot of anger and hate as we saw these atrocities being done. But you showed the reader that hate is not the answer. So this powerful love theme that you have in going through here, it seems to extinguish the flames of prejudice and hate and vengeance, and it seems to be a healing balm.
Thank you for saying that. I mean, if that came through, then that's great. As a reader, I hate reading novels that leave you completely flat on your back, dejected, feeling hopeless about the state of the world. I just and because I hate reading novels like that, I certainly would never write a novel that doesn't have at least some, slender flame of hope that's still burning at the end on the last pages. So I hope that I've managed to do that. However, I'll be a bit of a contrarian and say this: there is a part of me as a writer that wants my reader to hate. And what I mean by that is I want them to hate some of the systems, some of the patriarchal uh, rituals and traditions that I have described in this book. I think hate has a place, and maybe hate is the wrong word, but you know what I mean. I want them to be outraged by some of the things that they are reading, because, like it or not, we might think that living in America, we've put a good 1,000 miles between us and a society like India, but the fact is we are one world, we are one planet, and I just truly believe from the bottom of my heart that we all have a responsibility to what happens to vulnerable people, whether they are children or women or elderly people or men for that matter. I believe we all owe each other that sense of kinship, that sense of responsibility. Um, so, in that sense, I don't want the reader to walk away, filled, glowing with hope. I want them to walk away in the way that I walked away when I finished this novel, sensing that change is possible, but also being reminded of this very sober reality of how this is the truth. This is women's lives in so many corners of the world. And by the way, I should just add, I don't think we are completely immune to all this in the West either, right? We are seeing in our country right now how easily freedoms that women have taken for granted can be stripped away,
And
right? So
beautifully said. That was
yeah,
beautifully said.
yeah,
And Kristen and I are very big believers in women rights, women empowerment, even in today's day and age. And we also are very believers that all women are connected in so many different ways. We
right.
have the same desires, the same needs, the same respect, belonging. And that was beautifully said. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, your discussion, I have a question for you, but your discussion was making me think about the notions of honor and how there's all these nuances that tie in with love. And, the title alone really, that sit on me for quite a while at the end of this book, especially in light of what you were just talking about.
Yeah.
Well, well, I wanted to ask you, Smita experienced India in a whole new way when she returned as an adult. And we see her trying to reconcile many of the things you were just talking about. this is her birth country, and she left there under certain circumstances. And on the one hand, she has seen examples, especially in what, happened with Mina, about this patriarchal society, these feudal notions, this intolerance. But on the other, in Mohan especially, she observed everything that was beautiful about India, from acceptance of different faiths, or people helping one another, or this mindset of growth, especially in the bigger cities. And I wanted to ask you, as she grew to appreciate these aspects, even the lush beauty compared to the poverty, which I thought was great, do we all have to reconcile aspects of our home country? There's the good and there's the bad. And we do that with people too, right? And I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, human life, human nature is just contradiction. It's all duality, right? Every major religion on earth preaches this notion of duality, good versus evil, right? And I think it's true. And I think perhaps the key to it all, maybe, I don't want to sound like Yogi Berra here, but maybe the key to it all is to embrace it all, is to really accept the fact that we are all bundles of contradiction, right? Heaven and earth is here, and not just on earth, but heaven and hell, pardon me, is here. It's on earth, but not just on earth, but within each body, within each mind. We are all capable of tremendous good and tremendous harm in this life. So I think what happens, I mean, to me, one way of looking at this novel is to think of it as Smita's journey through the heart of darkness, if you will. Things get very, very grim as she and Mohan make this trip into Mina's village, where they come across traditions that, frankly, as a modern person, she would have expected would have ended 200 years ago. And she's appalled to find that these kind of that it's such a traditional society even now, right? With such regimented rules about the roles of women, the narrowness of rural life. But I think the Smita who comes to India on the first few pages of the novel, in some ways, is stunted in her development, because the trauma that she has suffered in her teenage years is still sort of, that's the story of her life. That's the story by which she knows herself. That's her identity. But as the novel unfolds and she's exposed to, as you said, some of the better things that India has to offer, she grows up, And I think by the end of the novel, the story that Smita would tell of herself would be quite different than the story she would tell in the first 50 pages. And I love seeing that growth in her, because to be an adult is to know that it's not perfect, but you love it anyway.
Yeah, very well put. And, being able to process the choices and decisions others make, sometimes you have to have a better understanding of the human condition.
Right.
Otherwise, we can be so focused on the negative and have a skewed perspective of people. So I
Exactly
thought that was
right.
very wise.
Exactly right.
I love that. I also love this quote from Mina, who is the character who had been attacked and maimed because of hate and prejudice against her against her religion. And she says, I'm going to quote, "As children, we were taught to be afraid of tigers and lions. Nobody taught us what I know today. The most dangerous animal in this world is a man with wounded pride." And I'm going to end the quote. This was held such truth for the reader in every culture, every society on the globe today. It spreads beyond religious persecution into politics, race, sex. As the creator of Mina, what do you believe about the dangers of pride? And I always think this sometimes. People become so caught up in the winning of their cause that they forget what the original cause was. It becomes a pride issue. You showed us that through this story as well.
Yeah, I think, in America today, we would, if you had to paraphrase what she refers to as wounded pride. Another way that we would say it is toxic masculinity, because in a sense, in part, anyways, that's what she's describing. By marrying Abdul, a Muslim man, out of her Hindu faith, she has brought shame and dishonor onto her family, mostly her two brothers. That is what they believe. This is the reason why their pride, their family pride, their honor, as they see it, has been wounded. And hence her observation that there's nothing more dangerous. She would rather take her chances in some jungle somewhere with wild animals than, the two men who are supposed to love her, her own blood, who she lives under, whose roof she has lived until recently. And they have become the biggest dangers in her life. So whether we call it men with wounded pride, whether we call it toxic masculinity, there is this impulse. Any society that believes in controlling the bodies of women, the fate of women, by any means necessary, right? Whether it's by laws on the books or whether it's through violence, whether it's through threats, whether it's through verbal abuse, any form that basically considers women to be the property of men. And when we talk about these things, we are always, when we talk about controlling women, what do we really mean? We're always talking about controlling women's physical bodies, and that means monitoring their movements. In Mina's case, they are first angry at her because she dares to take a job outside the home, something that you and I have done, without a second thought. In fact, it's been expected of us to be self-sufficient and provide for ourselves, but different culture, different rules. And I should just add, by the way, that, sometimes I have to point this out to readers, that a novel is a small thing. A novel simply describes a certain slice of life. This novel probably has, 12 characters in it, if even that. India has 1 billion plus people, right? So I'm not telling the story of all of India, right? I could write another book tomorrow that would show you a slice of life in India that would probably be more progressive than what we know in our lives here. So please just take that always under advisement, that I'm just describing a certain village at a certain time and place and a certain character to whom this has happened. Is she unique in this? I mean, is she the only person in the 21st century in India that this has been done to? Absolutely not. It's more common than it should be, but it's not the majority of people acting in this manner.
I believe the reader understands that and knows that. And that is the beauty of fiction, though, that you can take a real life situation, condense it into a beautiful story. And what you did, Thrity, you showed us not only India, you showed us something in ourselves through these characters. We related to them. We grew with Smita. We felt what they felt. We hurt, we hated, as you said. We loved. And this is what makes the most beautiful fiction, and thank you for that, because fiction, we do believe, has a good sense of reality to it.
Right.
And you let the reader relate to all these characters, and it was a beautiful story.
Well, thank you. That means that last statement of yours, that I showed you some aspect of yourself. That is every writer's wildest dream. I mean, I grew up reading mostly American writers, novelists when I was a teenager in India. It never once occurred to me to say, oh, wow, this is a story about, white people 10,000 miles away. Never occurred to me. It just felt like this was my story, that somebody had reached deep into my heart and was revealing something that I didn't even know existed there. That to me is the beauty of literature. It just it transcends all boundaries, and I know that the two of you know that, because you wouldn't be doing what you do if you didn't know that.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Well, I want to take that a step further, because this was an issue that really leapt out at me in terms of I've been bothering Chris all week about this one. But your story asks a question that I think most people have wrestled with in their lifetime. And that is this idea of who am I? What is my identity? Where does it come from? And, here we had some characters that we saw who had to change their religious identity for various reasons. And I was wondering if you felt like their identity truly changed or if their deep down character was the constant no matter what the outside label was. And I wonder if you could address that. And I love this topic. So I was intrigued that you took it on because it's a big one.
Well, yeah, it's a great question. I don't know if I have a smart answer to this question. My guess is that Smita is so young, first of all, when, the thing that happens in the novel, no spoilers, happens, that I don't know that her identity has been fully shaped or formed up to that point. But more than that, she grows up in this very sort of modern, secular, progressive, cosmopolitan household. I suspect that these are not people who primarily identify themselves by their faith or by their religious beliefs. I think in Mina's case, yeah, probably that is true because she's steeped in traditional culture. Smita grows up in this upper middle class, affluent, cosmopolitan, very secular minded. I mean, her father is a professor of religious studies, but that's an academic. It's a profession. It's not necessarily his identity. So for her to make that switch, I think she's glad to make that switch, especially after they come to America. It really is like being born again. It's like throwing away an old coat that has holes in it and buying yourself a fabulous new coat from, an expensive store. I think she rushes into acceptance of her new identity. We don't see much of her mother, but we do get a sense that her mom, for instance, grapples a lot more and feels the loss of her former self much more than the other three members of the family do. The brother, Rohit, is more than happy, perhaps more than any other member of the family, to out with the old and embracing the new. The father is busy, setting up a new life for himself and his family. So, he's okay with that, I think. But the mother, I think, misses her old self and her old life.
Yeah. Well, and this is where I guess the wrestling comes in because, when we talk about the world's major faiths, many of them do have an identity rooted in who you are in relation to God or gods.
Right.
And that identity may take precedence over I am Indian, I am American, I am a woman, I am a professor, whatever other identities that we may have.
Right.
And so I think a lot of people reach a point in their life where they think, okay, what is my identity? Because now I've got things that maybe are in conflict with one another.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we see that, right? In the U.S. I mean, that expression. I think it's a very disparaging expression, but cafeteria Catholics. Where people decide as adults that there are certain teachings in their faith that they disagree with because they clash with their values, with their political beliefs, and they're going to reject those. But there's enough good in every religion that there's an attraction there. There's the attraction of community, there's the attraction of ritual. I mean, I have often had conversations with my friends where I have said, tell me what the secular equivalent of going to church is. Right? There isn't. As far as I know, there isn't. What gives you beautiful music on Sunday mornings? What gives you somebody turning to you and saying, peace be with you? What gives you that sense of community that we are all under one roof together, friend and foe, stranger and friend altogether, there's very little in secular life that gives you that feeling of comfort, of belonging, you know. So I do think that in those ways, religious faith is very important to a lot of people. And it's not important. There are other ways also of defining yourself. You know, people have political identities. They have, you know, maybe somebody sees themselves primarily as a golfer. I don't know. You know.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Very important
I
questions.
loved the theme of the different faiths in this book, and Kristen and I were talking about it a little before we got started with you. That it's interesting to us that all over the world, the concept of God is universal. It isn't taught. It's almost innate in nature to even consider such a theory of a God. And then Kristen and I took it a step further and we said, a lot of faith is what you were born into. And maybe you cling to it because it's your tradition and it was your grandparents and it was your great parents. You're honoring them, but it takes an amount of courage and self-inflection to take a closer look and say, is this what I believe?
Right.
What do I want to believe? Do I want to pick, as you said, parts of this and create my own belief? And it's just very intriguing, the whole concept.
Yeah, I always find it hilarious that no matter what, you know, if you're born in Germany, hey, guess what? Suddenly Germany becomes the best country on earth, right? If you're born a Hindu, oh, there's no other religion better than that. If you're a Muslim, you know, exact same thing. I mean, there's something about human ego that is also at work here. Let's be honest, you know, wherever we find ourselves, whatever nation we find ourselves in, whatever religion, whatever, well, I don't know about families, but you know, the big stuff, right? I mean, I live in Cleveland, so of course I have to cheer for the Indian Guardians, right? It's just assumed that you would, but why? You know, why can't I be a Yankees fan, right? But this is where our own ego comes into play, right? And I think that's true for the religion. You know, I had a very different upbringing, guys. I'm neither Hindu nor Muslim. I grew up in India in this minuscule, very ancient religion. The religion is called Zoroastrianism. Nobody's heard of it. It was the religion of the Persian Empire, like thousands of years ago. My ancestors came to India really as refugees 1,000 years ago, from what today we would consider to be mostly Iran, you know. And the Parsis, as we are known in India, are, I mean, I think there's like 60,000 of us left in the world, right? It's a dot in this sea of a billion people. And yet it's a very, very culturally and ethnically and religiously, it's a very unique and distinctive community in India. So I always feel like Switzerland, you know, it's easy for me to always understand different sides of an issue, because I have the ability, I think, because of how I was raised, to be able to stand back a little bit and see the whole picture, so to speak. So there you go. That's yet another complication in this conversation that we are having.
That's very interesting. And can I ask you, do you travel to India very often? Have you been able to go back and
Well,
forth?
I was lucky enough to be there just before the pandemic hit. I mean, I just sort of got in under, you know, in the nick of time, really. So that's the last time, you know, last 2.5 years, haven't really been anywhere. I'm hoping to go, though, to do research for a new book that I'm just getting started on by the end of the year, this year.
And that was going to be my next question. Can you give us a little more of a clue about what you're working on?
Well, I can, but believe it or not, I just finished another book. It's called The Museum of Failures, and that's going to be out, I think, in the fall next year. Um, and that's a book about an Indian American man in his 30s, who goes to India for a certain reason. And while he's there, he realizes that his elderly mother is in the hospital, and so obviously he goes to see her. We realize that there's been conflict between mother and son over the years. We don't quite know why. And the longer he's there, family secrets are revealed, and it basically makes him rethink his entire life, in a sense, certainly his relationship with his mom. This character happens to be a Parsi, the same community that I was just referring to. So you get an insight and an inroad into a world that not too many people know about. Everybody's heard about Muslim faith, everybody knows about Hindus. This is a very distinctive, unique little community. And it gave me a certain amount of joy to write about it, even though the events in the book are completely fictionalized. But I could draw upon some of my own memories of growing up a Parsi.
That sounds
So
wonderful. We're going to all look forward to that. Absolutely. And thank you for traveling back and forth to India and for writing these beautiful novels that open the reader's eyes to different cultures and different countries and people and religions and faiths that we said before that we can all relate to. It's really a treasure. I want to say to our readers, you definitely want to pick this book up, Honor by Thrity Umrigar. And in the meantime, you can connect with her on Facebook and you can find her on Twitter. And Thrity, we just can't thank you enough. It's been a real joy talking to you today. And keep writing these beautiful stories.
thank you so much. And the two of you keep doing what you're doing. I've really, really enjoyed my time with both of you today. Thank you very
We did
much.
too. Wonderful.
Thank you.
All
That
right.
means
Take care.
a lot to us. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye. Some very big discussion with Thrity Umrigar today, Kristen, and I just love this point that you brought up to her about the good and the bad existing simultaneously, happy, sad, good, bad, good, evil. And it just sort of made me really think deeper the way that she said one doesn't exist without the other. You have both, and in this world, you almost have to be accepting of both and consistently hold out that hope through all of it because there are always going to be this duality.
Yeah. And maybe not accepting in the sense that we allow it to happen, but accepting in the sense that we know and should anticipate it happening. Because, when you think about it, a lot of times people become so entrenched in their maybe identity or their faith that they overlook the negative aspects and they make excuses for it. But the reality is there are things that need to be examined and held up and, tested, right?
Absolutely.
And I love this discussion because she really did go deep into many of the things that we always talk about, and that is even this idea of a faith. And as you get deeper into a faith, it forces you and challenges you to examine those tenets and make sure that you're living consistent with them. Because if you're not, then are you truly a person of that faith, right? We can't just pick and choose or make excuses or say that that's not really what it says. We have to really examine those and make sure that there's that genuine belief and then our actions line up with it.
And I like to take it even a step further, not just in religion, but in politics, in the legal system. To take a look at laws that have been written thousands or hundreds of years ago and be able to question them and to say, is there a purpose for them still in any kind of thing? The way that she was talking about women empowerment and just the ability to transition out of antique laws that no longer apply. What was the purpose of the original law? To protect people, to keep people safe. And is it still doing that? Or are we convoluting it? Is it doing something totally different, but we're sticking by it just because of pride? And these are some deep issues.
Yeah. In fact, I think that can go both ways too, because there are movements in the law now to protect both people and natural objects and animals who didn't have recognition in the law before now. But increasingly, we are looking at them in a different light that history has never done. So that goes both ways.
It sure does. And I wanted to bring up this other thing. We only had time to ask her a certain number of questions, but there was a quote in the book that I really, that spoke strongly to me. And it said this: perhaps that's what love was. an embrace of the commonplace. Perhaps that's where wisdom lay, in recognizing the grandeur of everyday domestic life. And that hit me so strong because I think sometimes we think of love or wisdom or valuable assets in life, emotional assets, as having to have some type of grandeur, explosion, something theatrical. And what her story said is that we've heard it before. The best things sometimes are just the simplest things.
Yeah.
Everyday life, finding a flower, holding a hand, talking to your child. Like, it doesn't have to be a huge, expensive, lavish vacation or the purchase of something big. It's these little life moments. And I loved that quote was in there.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I love that you love to talk about love. And
Okay,
that's one of the things I love about you. And, and I kept taking that back to this notion of honor. And, there's aspects of love that connect to honor, and that is we honor the ones that we love. In fact, we demonstrate love to them, as Thrity was talking about, by doing honor and showing honor and acting honorably. And there's a lot of people who have a false notion of honor, and that is, I have to defend somebody's honor or defend our family's name. But it's based on a foundation of things that were flawed to begin with. And so I love what she was talking about, because we really have to push into the root of love and honor and make sure that the foundation is not misplaced. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you get skewed love, jealousy, craziness, or dishonorable behavior that's dressed up in the guise of love. Mm-hmm. We don't want either of those, but we want to get to the root of things and make sure there's a consistency.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of tying back what I was saying about the law, or maybe law isn't really the perfect word, but also tradition. Maybe just tradition, things that we've grown up and always believed in. And is it still holding true for the purpose that it was created for, love and honor? Or has that become skewed in some kind of way? Yeah. And it's the wrong kind of honor or the wrong kind of love. There's a lot of really deep life issues inside this book called Honor by Thrity Umrigar that I just hit me so strongly. It's a book, it's an inspiring book, it's a book that matters, it's a life changer.
Yeah, excellent.
So thank you for joining us today, Bookstorm listeners. I'm going to give a little shout out to the incredibly talented Mr. Mark Carey. And speaking of tradition and honor and standing up for things that, for our group or small group or whatever, here Mark is today. And if you're on YouTube, you're going to see he is wearing a Buffalo Bills sweatshirt because he's a Buffalo Bills fan. Go Bills. Just say hi.
Go Bills, and have a good week. We'll see you next week.
Thanks to you, Mark. They will see us next week. And I'm going to give you a little glimpse of some storm predictions to pique your interest. We have Jamie Ford, the many daughters of A Fong Moy, William Kent Kruger and Fox Creek, Shelby Van Pelt with Remarkably Bright Creatures, Lisa Unger, Secluded Cabin, Sleep 6, Pam Jenoff, codename Sapphire, and Geraldine Brooks with Horse.
Oh my gosh, just thinking about some of those interviews of the names you were listing there, I cannot wait. We went deep in those books. In the meantime, listeners, just stay on the radar with us by visiting our website at bookstormpodcast.com. You can visit us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and now TikTok. And if you'd like to see us in person, or better yet, one of our fantastic authors, you can look up Bookstorm Podcast on YouTube and you will find us there. And until next time, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep into life-changing fiction.